This really happened to me, and I still feel the heat rise in my neck when I picture it. I'm not exaggerating or changing names to be cute. This is my life. And the day my mother-in-law turned my baby's christening into her victory parade. At St. Clement Church in Lincoln Park, with light slanting through stained glass and the smell of beeswax candles in the air, I unfolded the program in my lap and saw her name, hosted and planned by Diane Whitaker, printed in bold below our daughters. 30 seconds later, Diane took the mic in the parish hall and thanked everyone for letting me plan this beautiful day, as if my husband and I hadn't spent months preparing. I remember the soft weight of the christening gown on my knees, the clatter of dishes from the caterer, and the way the room's hum seemed to snap around me like a rubber band as people turned, smiling, to look at her and then at me. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I'm Ava, and I was the one who said we needed a small ceremony. Not no celebration, just small. Chicago family, a few friends, a modest reception afterward, something centered on our daughter and not on anyone's ego. But Diane doesn't do modest, she does gala. She does charcuterie boards that deserve their own zip code and floral arrangements you have to fight to see around. She was perfectly nice when we first started dating. Sugary nice. That kind of melt-on-your-tongue niceness that in retrospect tasted like confectioner's dust and performance. She's from Winnetka, volunteers at the Art Institute, and helps chair a fundraiser every spring where she is photographed standing next to people whose names end in numerals. When Mark and I got engaged, she sent me a spreadsheet labeled Just Suggestions that looked suspiciously like the blueprint for Versailles. Mark warned me that his mother could be particular. He said it with a little grin, the kind sons wear when they're helplessly fond and slightly terrified. He's a good man, steady, decent, a middle school science teacher who knows how to coax a stubborn experiment into a workable demonstration. He softened his mother's edges for me when he could, and when he couldn't, he shrugged and said, "That's just Mom." I tried to shrug with him. I really did. I told myself this was family, and families are messy but stitched together by love. And I could live with some dramatic flowers and the word darling said like a period. Then I got pregnant, and the volume on Diane's life turned up. She had opinions about the baby's name. She had opinions about the stroller, which she bought without asking because the one you picked doesn't have good shocks. She had opinions about cloth diapers, barbaric. About breastfeeding, the only acceptable way. About daycare, not if there's an option to hire a trusted nanny. My own mother once called me and said, "Do I need to fly in and hold your hand while you hold the baby?" And she would have from Dallas to O'Hare if I'd said yes. But I didn't. I told myself I'd manage. I wanted our daughter's christening to be at St. Clement because when I first moved to Chicago, before Mark, I'd go sit in those pews to stop my brain from spinning. There's something about that sanctuary that quiets the static. I remember the nave's vaulted ceiling, the way the choir loft looks like it's holding its breath. When we met with Father Tom, he shook my hand and said, "We'd be honored to baptize her here." And I thought, good, simple, beautiful, done. Diane volunteered to help with the reception, and Mark squeezed my knee under the table when she did, as if to say, "Be gracious." So I said yes. I sent Diane the small guest list, a handful of friends, my parents coming in from Texas, Mark's sister, a few of his cousins, his Aunt Carol, who has the world's kindest laugh. I picked the parish hall because it felt anchored to the ceremony. It would be right downstairs. We could keep the baby in her gown without schlepping her across town. And then, like a magician's subtle misdirection, things began to move. First came the group text Diane created, with people I didn't recognize. "So excited for the christening," she wrote. "I've arranged everything." When I scrolled through the names, I saw a woman Diane knew from the women's club, a couple from the fundraiser committee, and Mark's father's lawyer and his wife. I asked Mark, "Who are half these people?" And he squinted at the list and said, "I think those are my mom's friends. She probably thought it would be nice." Nice. There's that shrug again. The one that says a small invasion is still an invasion, but if we call it hospitality, maybe it becomes palatable. Next came the venue upgrade. Diane called me one afternoon to say, "Ava, darling, the parish hall is so sweet, but it's a bit dated." I took the liberty of reserving the private room at the Gage on Michigan Avenue, the one with the lovely vintage portraits. It's going to be absolutely perfect for photos. I stared out our kitchen window at the February Chicago sky, that hard white incapable of kindness, and said, "I don't want to move the reception downtown. We specifically chose the parish hall because it's convenient," she said, completing my sentence with a tone that patted me on the head. "The Gage isn't far. I'll have a shuttle. The staff is divine. And this will be so meaningful. The chef is willing to prepare baby-safe purees so she can participate in the meal. She's 6 months old, Diane. Little dabs." She chirped. "We'll do little dabs." I hung up and sat on the counter because standing felt like an argument with gravity. My phone buzzed again, a forwarded email with a PDF attached, an invitation. Celebrating the baptism of Eliza May, hosted by her Nana, Diane Whitaker. My name and Mark's were there, two smaller, with love from her parents. Ava and Mark, like the afterthought you add because you're polite. For the record, I told her no. For the record, I said we weren't changing venues. I said the parish hall would be just fine. Diane murmured understanding and then sent the invitations anyway. Because in Diane's universe, no is simply an opening bid. I could say I wasn't angry, but that would be the kind of lie you tell to keep your own temperature down. I was livid, but livid in a way that slid behind my teeth and tapped my jaw. I told Mark that I felt like someone had rearranged the furniture in my life while I was in the bathroom, and he held me and said, "I'll talk to her." "I will." He did. He called his mother, and there was a long silence. And then he came back to the couch and said, "She's already paid the deposit." Which, in our family's language, might as well have been the law of the Medes and Persians. The morning of the christening, my mother and father arrived from Dallas carrying overnight bags and a small box. "It's your gown," my mother said, undoing tissue like it was an act of devotion. My grandmother had saved it all these years, carefully laundered and folded. Lace at the collar, pearl buttons like nail heads of moonlight. We slipped it onto Eliza and the fabric whispered against her skin. She cooed once, then tucked her face into my neck. My mother cried. We took a photo on our staircase. I thought, this is right. We got to St. Clement ahead of everyone. Because I wanted to hand the reception envelopes to the church staff, payment for the parish hall. A thank you gift for the woman who'd helped me reserve it. I'd written the checks myself. But when we stepped into the vestibule, one of the staff members, Sandy with soft hands, said, "Oh, hun, Diane took care of all that." She... "What?" I asked. "Paid for everything," Sandy said, "and sent over the programs herself." Programs? I looked down at the stack and felt the air change in my chest. The cover had Eliza's name in that pretty serif I would have chosen, but below it, just as pretty and with far more audacity. Hosted and planned by Diane Whitaker. Planned. As if our daughter's sacrament had been her themed party. Everything from there came fast. The ceremony, the priest's hand dipping into the font, water beadlining my baby's scalp, her surprise cry, my own breathless laugh at the sound of it. I held her, and light poured across the nave like honey poured too fast, bright and almost sticky. Mark touched my elbow and kissed my temple. It was beautiful the way these things often are, even when some part of the machinery is grinding. Then we filed into the parish hall that I had wanted, just for a moment, just to greet people before the shuttle, and there she was. Diane? In a cream suit, pearl pin that probably knew how much it cost, standing by a rental mic she had delivered, saying, "Before we head downtown to the Gage, I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for letting me plan this beautiful day for our little angel. I am not a person who starts public fights. My anger usually goes quiet. But something hit the stone walls of my patience and bounced hard. I looked down at the program again, and the bold letters spelled out not just her name, but my humiliation in clean, printer-perfect lines. I felt the urge rising, in me, not as tears, but as a measured, almost clinical disgust, like a tide I could either let flood or redirect. "Smile," my mother whispered, touching my wrist. "We'll handle the rest later." And so I smiled in the way women smile when they're indexing every wound for later cataloging. We got through handshakes. We got through kisses. We took the shuttle because it was undeniably efficient. And I carried my humiliation like an object with edges, careful not to cut anyone else with it yet, just feeling its shape, mapping it, promising myself that I would not forget. Because forgetting is what lets someone, like Diane, draw the map of your life and write, "Decorated by me," in the margins. By the time we stepped out onto Michigan Avenue and up into the Gage's private room, the one with the vintage portraits and the heavy wooden door, I had built something inside me that wasn't rage. It was design. It was a plan drawn like a blueprint I pressed flat against my chest where no one could see it. And when the servers set down a cake from Bittersweet, white frosting, piped in pale blue, the words "Nana's little angel" arching across the top, I knew the plan would be necessary. Because what looked like a party was actually a campaign, and what looked like my acquiescence was me choosing my battlefield. People say it's not worth fighting with family. They say pick your battles. I say this was my daughter's first sacrament, and Diane had stepped onto it like a red carpet. Battle chosen, and what I did next is why I'm telling you this at all. I took pictures. Not just a few, dozens, then hundreds. I'm a photographer by training and habit, and I had my Canon slung across my body like a seatbelt. I shot with the kind of technical patience that looks like detachment but is really control. Aperture tucked small for depth, ISO kept tight because the light was good. I took the obvious shots. The Williams family with the baby, Aunt Carol crying into her napkin for no tangible reason, and the strange ones, the programs in a neat stack with Diane's name bold under our daughters, the bittersweet cake with the piping that made my stomach clench, the chalkboard sign at the entrance, "Welcome to Eliza's baptism luncheon," hosted by Nana, that I had to walk past without tearing down. I shot the place cards, half of them with last names I didn't know. I shot Diane holding Eliza and telling her she would teach her to say Nana first. I wasn't invisible, but I was treated like I was part of the event's machinery. "Ava, could you get one of me with the Kleins?" Diane say without a flicker of shame. "A candid?" She had, at some point that morning, become a benevolent queen bestowing favors, and everyone else had become subjects. She gestured at the florist. Yes, there was a florist, as if she'd arranged the lilies with her own hands. She said to the manager, "The amuse-bouche can go now," like she hadn't learned the word last week. And everyone thanked her. They thanked her over and over by name. Mark saw the look on my face and tried to anchor us both with a graze of his hand along my back. "We'll talk to her," he murmured. "We'll fix it." He meant it, but there's a difference between fixing a faucet and fixing the way someone rearranges reality. I kissed my daughter's head and focused. I took photos until the camera felt like an extension of my ribs. And I was careful, so careful, to also take pictures of the quiet moments. My father's fingers smoothing the gown's hem, my mother leaning in to make Eliza laugh by pretending to sneeze, Mark fastening the pearl buttons at the back of the neck. Those were the photos I wanted to hold like rosary beads later when the noise calmed and my hands were empty of anger. When we got home that night, my phone lit up with tags. Diane had posted an album on Facebook titled "Nana's Baptism Brunch for Little Eliza." My photos, the ones I'd snapped quickly on my phone as backup, uploaded without credit because I'd airdropped some to her when she nagged. She'd also uploaded a photo of the program and wrote, so proud to give my granddaughter the celebration she deserves. When family steps up, magic happens. The comments poured in. You're such a wonderful Nana. Diane, you're amazing. Perfection. Someone even asked if she was starting a business. I felt used in a way I don't have a pleasant word for. My work, because photographs are work, had been swallowed by the narrative she'd written for herself. So I did what I always do when something rips at me. I went quiet and then I went methodical. First, I opened Lightroom on my laptop and imported everything from my Canon. I metered them in my mind. The clean whites of the church, the warm wood of the pews, the way the light fell on Eliza's cheek like benevolence. I edited with a surgeon's care. No heavy filters, no fake drama. True, crisp, sharp. I flagged the photos that mattered. I made a second folder and put in all the pictures where Diane's name appeared physically in the world, on the program. The chalkboard, the cake, in case anyone later tried to gaslight me about how obvious it really was. Second, I opened the email I'd received from Bittersweet when I asked for the cake price, and the one I'd received from the florist, and the one from the Gauge when I'd told them we wouldn't be needing a room. Then the follow-up from a different email, a Gmail that Diane had clearly created to mimic mine, Ava J. Weddings instead of Ava J. Weddings, asking the Gauge about wine pairings on behalf of Ava. I printed those. I printed everything. I labeled each sheet in pencil at the top right corner, 1, 2, 3, as if I were constructing exhibit folders for a trial. Maybe I was. Third, I called Father Tom. I'm sorry, I said. I just wanted to confirm something. The payment for the parish hall, did that come through? He cleared his throat and said yes from Mrs. Whitaker. I asked to make a donation in our names. For Eliza, I said, from her parents, please. He said he'd be honored. I made the donation that afternoon and asked, carefully, if I could have a receipt reflecting our names. He said of course, and when I hung up, I pressed my forehead to the cool of the window. I wasn't erasing what Diane had done. I was making sure our daughter's day had our names in the ledger somewhere that counted. Fourth, and this is the part some people will say is petty, I drafted a DMCA takedown notice. Being a photographer means you pick up a certain competence in protecting your work. The photos on Facebook that Diane had posted from my phone, I owned them, rights and all. I sent formal messages to the platform identifying specific images, my authorship, and demanding removal. I kept it clinical, not personal. When the confirmation emails came back, I filed them in the same manila folder as the printed emails. I knew Diane would call when she got the notices. And she did, her voice high and outraged, as if I'd vandalized her lawn. You had my photos taken down, she accused. I had my photos taken down, I said. I own them. You didn't ask to use them. I'm your family, she snapped. And I'm the one who took them, I said. Those two things can be true at once. She hung up on me. I sat with the quiet like it was a friend. Fifth, I designed a book. Artifact Uprising does these linen-bound volumes that feel like they matter the second you touch them. I laid out 80 pages. The ceremony first, then family portraits, then a section I titled, privately, What She Tried to Own. But the captions on the page were not mine. The pages were clean and quiet. For every picture where Diane's name appeared, on a program, on a sign, in frosting, I edited the image so that the name was gone. I cloned, healed, painted. The hosted and planned byline vanished from the program. The chalkboard at the Gauge read simply, Welcome to Eliza's baptism luncheon. The cake said nothing but my daughter's name, simple and perfect. And every other caption I added credited the people who had actually mattered. Father Tom, St. Clement's staff, my mom stitching new thread into the gown's seam, the choir whose voices turned the church into a bell. There were photos of Mark holding Eliza with the kind of pride you don't invent, and me laughing with my father in a way that's ugly and beautiful at once. Diane was in the book too. Of course she was. It would have been a lie to erase her, but she was there as a grandmother holding a child, not as producer or MC. The story of the day belonged to the small hands holding on to larger fingers, not to the one woman who wanted the credit. When the first copy arrived, I ran my finger along the spine and didn't open it right away. I put water on for tea. I stood at the sink and watched the kettle's chrome belly quiver. Only then did I sit and open to the first page. Eliza's face, solemn. The font I'd chosen, light, unassuming. No hosted by, no interloper. I cried then, the kind of short-lived, efficient cry that convulses once and then is done, because what I felt wasn't grief so much as relief. I was not powerless. I was not small. I could tell the truth the way I wanted it told, but I wasn't done. Because if I've learned anything, it's that you can't just build a fortress. You sometimes have to invite people in to see the walls. I ordered 8 more copies. I wrapped them in tissue and tied them with simple cotton twine. I wrote names on cards in my careful handwriting. And I waited for Thanksgiving, because that's when Diane gathers the family in Winnetka and seats herself at the head like a portrait of power. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a friend in Diane's circle texted me a link. Diane had been featured in the Women's Club newsletter, an article titled, "Local Philanthropist Gives Back to Family, a Baptism to Remember," complete with a photo of the program where her name bloomed bold as ever. I read it twice and felt the sharp, clean edge of decision slice the fuzz off my anger. No more quiet. No more hoping people would see. I would show them. The night before we drove north, Mark and I sat on the couch, the baby monitor a small green eye between us. "Are you sure?" he asked when I told him my plan. "I'm past sure," I said. "I'm done apologizing for protecting our daughter's story." He nodded slowly. "I should have stopped her," he said quietly. "I should have protected you from this." "You're protecting us now," I said. "And I know how your mother is. She's good at making resistance feel like rudeness." He laughed once without humor. "That's her superpower." "Then mine is evidence," I said, and I slid the manila folder onto the coffee table. I showed him the emails, the takedown confirmations, the invoice copies, the donation receipt from St. Clement with our names. And I showed him the book. When he turned the pages, his eyes went wet. "She took this from you," he said, more to the room than to me. "From us." "No," I said, putting my hand on the book. "She tried." Thanksgiving would show the difference. Winnetka, when winter is knocking, feels like a place where wealth has put on its velvet dress and decided not to leave the house. The Whitaker home sits back from the road, brick and black shutters, a maple in the front yard that looks good even erased of leaves. Inside, the air always smells like something pleasant that was bought in a bottle to smell like something pleasant that grew from the earth. Diane opened the door and looked me up and down with a quick scan that never made me feel like a person so much as a purchase. "Ava," she said, airy. "The baby?" "Eliza's with Mark," I said. Napping in the car, we walked in. People were already gathered in the living room, glasses of something pale in their hands. The table was set with the good china, obviously. The centerpiece looked like a florist's dream sequence. "Everyone," Diane sang, clinking her glass with a nail that had recently been to a salon. "I'm so glad you're here." She kissed cheeks. She kissed the air near cheeks. She said, "My darling son, the teacher," as if it were a quaint hobby. She squeezed my arm and said, "And our new photographer in the family," with a bright smile that made me think of freshly polished danger. If she expected me to cringe, I didn't. I put the stack of wrapped books on the sideboard. I put the manila folder next to them. I waited until the moment she loves most, the one where she makes a toast and watches the room bend toward her like sunflowers to light. "Before we eat," she said, raising her glass, "I want to say I'm so thankful for this year. For my family and for the privilege, truly, the privilege, of hosting our granddaughter's christening luncheon." She looked at me when she said hosting, not with apology, but with the bright-eyed glee of a person who just landed a punch. The room rustled with polite assent. "We gave her a day fit for a princess," she added. "May I say something?" I asked, my voice even as the table arranged itself into attention. Diane blinked. People don't usually interrupt her. "Of course, darling." She smiled, that knife-thin smile. I picked up the first wrapped book and handed it to Aunt Carol. "I made something for the family," I said. I handed one to Mark's sister, to his cousins, to his father. When I reached Diane, I put her copy on her plate and kept my hand on it just long enough that she had to look at me. "I wanted everyone to have the truth of that day," I said. "Not just the version that lives on Facebook or in club newsletters." The room's air hissed in a collective intake. Diane's smile did not change, but the skin around her eyes did. She slid a fingernail under the twine, untied it neatly, and lifted the linen cover. There was a beat while people opened to the first page and made the soft, appreciative noises people make at good photos. Then there was another different beat when they reached the detail pages and the absence, the cut, registered. You could see the pixels smooth where a name should have been. You could see the captions crediting specific hands and hearts and not one mention of hosted by. "What is this?" Diane asked, her voice soft and dangerous. "Some kind of edit?" "Yes," I said straightforward. "I edited out every place your name appeared at my daughter's christening, because you decided the day was yours to brand. I wanted a record that belonged to Eliza and her parents." "Petty," she said. A controlled exhale around the word. "Accurate," I said. "It's a book." She laughed lightly, addressing the table like we were on a talk show, full of omissions. "Not omissions," I said, flipping my copy to a page where Eliza's hand is curled around Mark's thumb. "Corrections. The invitation you sent called yourself the host. The program you printed credited yourself as planner. The cake announced Nana's little angel. Those are your additions." "This is me taking them back." Mark slid his copy forward. "Mom," he said, calm and bigger than I'd ever seen him, "you turned our daughter's sacrament into a showcase for yourself." "I paid for it," she shot back, as if money were the wand that justified any magic. I picked up the manila folder and laid it open like a map. "Some of it," I said. "Here are the invoices, and here's the donation to St. Clement in our names, for our daughter's baptism. You put your name on their ledger that day. We put ours on it forever." I handed Father Tom's receipt to Mark's father, a decent man who has learned over years to find the quiet path but who still possesses a sense of right and wrong, like a compass needle that can't be demagnetized. Mark's father looked at the paper and cleared his throat. He didn't look at his ex-wife. He looked at his son and then at me, and there was pride there that made me want to cry and didn't. "Thank you," he said simply, "for doing that. I didn't enjoy what came next, but I also didn't flinch. I also had my photos removed from your Facebook," I said to Diane, "because you uploaded them without permission and used them to advertise your hosting." There were some raised eyebrows at the table that turned toward Diane like weather vanes. "And for what it's worth," I added, "I kept you in the book. You're Eliza's grandmother. You belong in the story. But your name doesn't belong on her day like a watermark." Diane skimmed another page, saw the clean chalkboard where her claim used to be, and made a small sound that might have been a scoff or a swallow. "This is vindictive," she said finally. "It's a boundary," I said. "It's what it looks like when someone refuses to be erased from her own life. There's a part of me that loves a speech, but I didn't want to preach. I wanted things to be unmistakably clear in a way that didn't need adjectives to hold it up. I wanted the evidence to do the work." In the pause that followed, you could watch realization move around the table like light from a fire at night, first illuminating one face, then another. Aunt Carol wiped her eyes. Mark's sister put her hand on my forearm. Diane's mouth thinned and she stood, slow as a stage direction. "Excuse me," she said, and left the room. Mark let out a breath he'd been holding and looked at me with something inside his gaze that felt like weather clearing. The baby cried in the monitor as if on cue. I went to pick her up while Diane collected herself, possibly in the mirror, possibly in the place inside her that still believed control was love. When I came back, some of the family had flipped to the back of the book where I'd left a blank page for notes. Mark's father wrote, "To Eliza, love is quiet and patient," and dated it. Diane returned and sat. That more than anything surprised me. She didn't bluster. She didn't throw me out. She didn't apologize either. The meal began, brittle at first and then not. She didn't toast again. She ate her food. She avoided the book like it was radioactive. And for the rest of the night, when people said, "Beautiful book," they said it to me. I didn't win a prize. I didn't want one. What I wanted was to hold the story in my hands and know what it said. And I did. And later that night, when Mark wrapped his arm around my waist as we loaded the diaper bag into the car, he said, "I'm sorry for the times I made you feel like you were being dramatic, when you were being exact." I turned and kissed his palm. "Thank you for standing next to me," I said, "and not in front of me." We drove home through the dark, and Lake Michigan was a flat black sentence on our left, and I felt, for the first time in months, not smaller than someone else's narrative. For a while after that, things were quiet. Diane's social media got polite. She posted photos without long-winded captions. She didn't show up unannounced at our apartment with new, must-have items. If she bought something, she texted first and actually waited for an answer. At first, I thought maybe she'd learned something. Maybe my line in the sand had functioned like a lesson. But then a friend sent me a screenshot from the Women's Club's private Facebook group, Diane, asking for recommendations for a tasteful graphic designer who can fix a photo book that has some mistakes. The stomach drop wasn't because I was surprised. It was because I wasn't. Mark saw my face and said gently, "What now?" "Now," I said, "we make sure the lesson sticks. I don't believe in cruelty, but I do believe in consequence. If someone learns from the smallest nudge, bless them and move on. If they require more, give them exactly the amount needed and not a drop more." I opened my laptop and typed, "How to register photographs with the U.S. Copyright Office." I'd done it before in a piecemeal way, but I sat there and registered the whole set, the church, the family portraits, the reception. It's procedural more than romantic. It doesn't require drama. It requires 45 minutes and some attention to detail. I made a folder in my desk drawer labeled Eliza Baptism Photographs, Copyright Reg. Not because I plan to sue my mother-in-law, God, no, but because people like Diane understand official. They understand papers and stamps and numbers you can look up. Then I did something that looked small and was not. I printed a second run of the book, just 3 copies. On the back of those, I added a line of text at the bottom in neat small font. Photographs Ava Whitaker and the year, with the registration number in microtype. 1 copy went on our coffee table. 1 went to my mother, who had watched me swallow and smile and then build. And 1, wrapped in tissue, tied with twine, card written in my careful script, went to Diane. She called when it arrived. "You are impossible," she said. It wasn't angry. It wasn't fond. It was like she'd discovered a locked door in a house she believed she owned. "I'm a mother," I said, which was true and sufficient. "I suppose this is how it's going to be," she murmured. "This," I said, "is how it's going to be when you take credit for my life." I could hear her breathing. "I didn't fill the space." "Very well," she said, and we hung up. And I believed for a week or 2 that perhaps the door would remain. But the thing about people who reorganize the air around them is that if they can't make you yield directly, they'll try to go around you. I found out in January, when the Art Institute held its winter gala, that Diane had told a small cluster of donors the story of my granddaughter's christening at the Gauge, complete with a charming giggle about how the church's programs made a little typo. A typo. As if the displacement of my name from my own family were a smudge of ink. I couldn't keep walking around that. I wrote a letter, not to expose her, but like pulling someone's hand back from a burner that they keep slapping because they like the sound. I addressed it to Diane. I copied Mark's father, because healthily divorced or not, he remains a person who will say, "Enough." I kept it plain, devoid of adjectives, made of nouns and verbs that could survive cross-examination. Attached were copies of the invitation she sent, hosted by, the program, planned by, and an email from the Gage manager saying, "We were thrilled to work with Mrs. Whitaker, while our original contract inquiry was clearly mine." This is the pattern, I wrote. This is how it feels on my end. This is what must not happen again. I ended, "Eliza will hear the story of her baptism from us. She will not hear about Nana's brunch. She will hear about water and light and her parents, and the family who loved her, and a room full of people who were there for her. Not for you." I put the letter in the mail, because sometimes digital isn't heavy enough. A paper letter lives in a drawer and makes a soft thud when you put it down. She would feel its weight. 2 days later, Mark's father called. "Ava," he said, a careful warmth in his voice. "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have intervened sooner," he said. "I didn't because, well, you know why?" "I do," I said. "She's not going to like it," he went on, "but she's going to abide by it." "I don't need her to like it," I said. "I just need her to stop." And then something unexpected happened. Diane didn't call to rage. She didn't show up at our door. She sent an email. 2 sentences. "I received your letter. I will be more mindful in the future." Not an apology, but a statement. I printed it and put it in the folder, not because I was collecting trophies, but because having it there made my hands steadier. From then on, I noticed the little ways the shift held. When we threw Eliza's first birthday at home in Logan Square, balloons taped to the wall, a cake from Bang Bang Pie Shop because I love their crust more than heaven, Diane came with a small gift and a smile that didn't threaten to swallow the room. She asked how she could help, and when I said, "Would you mind grabbing ice?" she grabbed ice. She didn't grab the mic. She didn't bring a mic. When her friends asked about the day later, she said, "Ava put together a lovely party, and the world did not end." It kept spinning, quiet and efficient, as if the sky prefers its stars unarranged. And the book. Oh, the book. If you come to our house and ask to see it, I'll pull it off the shelf and hand it to you without ceremony. I won't make you read the microtype. I won't tell you about DMCA notices or manila folders or the geometry of a boundary learned in adulthood. I'll just let you look at the photographs of a church and a baby and the particular light that a sacrament seems to invite into a room. You'll turn the pages to a chalkboard sign that says exactly what it should say and not more. You'll see a program without a name that doesn't belong. You'll see a grandmother holding a child, not a woman holding a brand. And you'll see a mother, the me that I reclaimed, standing next to a father, both looking like the day belongs to them because it does. People talk about revenge like it's lava, hot, fast, destructive. Now I think of it like editing, cold, precise, a scalpel that removes what shouldn't be there so the living thing underneath can breathe. It felt so good to cut her name from every place she'd laid claim, not because I wanted her erased, but because I wanted my daughter's day to be free from stamps and watermarks and the kind of credit that isn't earned. And when I look at those pages now, what I hear most clearly is the quiet of the church after everyone left. When the sanctuary echoed with our footsteps, and Eliza snuffled sleepily, and the beeswax smell grew more itself. That's the story I kept. That's the story she'll have. When the second winter melted into the kind of spring Chicago gives you in cautious installments, we took Eliza back to St. Clement. She toddled down the aisle in little shoes that squeaked faintly, the sound wrapped in the stone's soft acoustics. Father Tom saw us and waved. "Back for round 2? He joked and then made a face. "That sounded like I'm offering a subscription service." "We're just visiting," I said, "to say thank you." I handed him a copy of the book. He turned the pages with the pastoral patience of a man who knows he is custodian to many important days and doesn't rank them. And when he reached the page where the program was clean, he paused and then looked up at me. I think he understood, even without an essay. "It was a beautiful day," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "It was." We stood in the cool of the nave, and my daughter slapped her hand against a pew like she was measuring it for future mischief. And beyond the doors, Michigan Avenue soldiered on with its shops and sirens and tour buses. And for the first time in a long time, the story of my own life felt like something I didn't have to argue with. Back outside, I took a photo of Mark swinging Eliza in the light. No captions, no uploads. The frame was enough. The truth was enough. And sometimes, when Diane visits now, she sits on the floor and builds blocks with Eliza, who is very serious about demolition. And Diane laughs and says, "You are such a force." And she means my daughter. Every now and then the old muscle memory flickers. She offers to handle something, and I say, "We've got it," and she nods. That's all. That's enough. The world corrects like a camera's auto-white balance, and faces stop glowing too white, and the room's colors come back. I know this reads like a neat arc. Like the hero learned something, and the villain turned down her volume, and the credits rolled. Real life keeps going. New days unspool, and fresh battles volunteer. But I learned what I needed to learn. That I can cut away what doesn't belong. That I can hold the blade steady without cutting myself. That I can add our names where they go with ink that doesn't fade just because someone is louder. And I learned that when someone tries to write themselves across your life, the most satisfying revenge isn't to write over them in bigger letters. It's to take the eraser to the places they never should have been, and leave what's true to radiate quietly. Unmistakably. There's one more page in the book now, tucked into the back, not glued down, loose like a promise. It's a simple print from a different day. My daughter on the grass in Millennium Park, wind flipping her hair at the edges, Cloudgate reflecting a Chicago that looks like it loves her. On the bottom, in my handwriting, "Eliza, we will always protect your story. That's not a trademark claim." It's a vow, and when I close the cover at night, after the house goes quiet and you can hear the kind of city noises that sound like a lullaby if you want them to, I run my thumb along that linen spine and I think about how it felt to sit at a Thanksgiving table and hand everyone a clean version of the truth. I think about a chalkboard sign with no name. I think about a program spared of someone else's pride. I think about the way a camera shutter sounds when it catches exactly what you mean for it to catch. Decisive, a little smug, perfect. When I picture Diane's face the moment she saw that her name was gone, I don't feel cruel. I feel corrected. I feel like I did what was mine to do, in the language I speak best. And in the quiet after that moment, after the album closed, after the meal, after the kind words from people who love nuance and not theater, I found a new stillness inside me that felt a lot like becoming the kind of mother I promised myself I would be. Not loud, not small exact. That stillness I keep. That book I keep. And the knowledge that she can no longer watermark our lives, that finally is mine. The end.